Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel. We take a look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern. Try to help you figure out how to use these theories of everything in your own life to fullest effect, and especially in terms of your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, and your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. Today is our 87th video that we have done on Daniel Ingram and his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And I have no particular allegiance to Buddhism in general, but Dr. Ingram provides a toolkit of things that will help you to reach your enlightenment as far as meditation is concerned. He provides basically the techniques and also the maps of your states and stages of consciousness as you go about your meditations, so that you kind of know where you're at and how you're doing. And these are hard-won lessons from Ingram. He's spent a lot of time over in the Far East and other places doing meditation retreats, meditating 18 hours a day or whatever, and also has spoken with and soaked up information from many masters, so-called, from the Buddhist traditions over there in those monasteries, and also read a lot of books on Buddhism, and so he kind of puts it all into one book here and puts it into English, because a lot of this stuff is not in English. And so he's really trying to kind of distill a 2,500-year tradition and put everything that is important that you need to know in order to enlighten yourself into one book. And I think he does a pretty good job. I disagree with, I feel like he needs to be red-pilled. In spite of the fact that he's enlightened, he's not red-pilled. So I think, I wonder whether he pushed the, as a physician back 4 years ago, because he does seem to be pretty enthusiastic about medicine, allopathic medicine, that is. But anyway, we are in the middle of the section where he talks about mainly it's autobiographical, where he's talking about his experiences and how he got to the point that he is at now, and all the different adventures that he took on. And right now he is about to get enlightened, I believe, for the first time, to reach stream entry. And I think he just did it. He had this kind of episode with this what he calls the little god gerbil, where he saw a gerbil and God, and the gerbil has the essence of God, and they kind of merged into one another. But we'll let Dr. Ingram explain it, and I'll comment as I see fit. Okay, as an aside, as far as I can tell, the specifics of the gerbil god imagery are strictly idiosyncratic, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend visualizing a gerbil god, just in case anyone is asking. That basic concept of recognizing divine aspects of a deity and then yourself, however, is the basis of various tantric generation stage practices. But none that I know of specify gerbils. If that basic type of practice appeals to you, perhaps give those a try. As promised, the spiritual path is not a linear one. During the next few days, I swung wide from the greatest spiritual highs to the horrible lows of what can happen during reobservation, which is stage 10 on the insight stages cycle, the last stage of the dark night. In fact, the closest I ever felt to losing it entirely during my whole nearly 2 decades so far meditating was the next insight cycle I went through as a new stream enterer. When I hit reobservation, I felt so volatile that I broke the guidelines against leaving the monastery and eating dinner. I left the monastery, went across the street, got something to eat, and at a little seasonable Tibetan noodle hut, not because I was hungry, but because I thought it would help ground me, which I desperately needed. I remember a young Indian man saying hello and asking where I was from, which had happened literally thousands of times during that year in India, and I remember nearly snarling at him to leave me alone, which is not at all my usual mode of relating to people. At the time, it just felt like way too much input, and I was edgy beyond anything I had known before, and very much not in a mood to talk to anybody. The horrible feeling and mood lasted a few hours, and by the next day I had managed to get a repeat fruition, which is the 15th and basically culminating stage of insight meditation. For the next few weeks, my mind was powerful beyond reason, and yet I was a complete novice in this new territory. I was a bit like a newly licensed 16-year-old driver who had just been given a Ferrari with no brakes and a pair of night vision goggles. Might I mention here that I was also practicing at what can only be described as far beyond full power, or at least beyond what was full power before, as now there was meditation power like I had never known, staggering amounts of it. And I was using every single bit at basically every single instant of the day to try to see every single sensation in the light of Vipassana. Here we get into a theoretical conflict. You see, Kenneth had advised me to do strict fruition practice after getting stream entry, in which I would practice hard and drill hard to get repeat fruitions as quickly and as often as possible. Part of this instruction might have been motivated by the fact that, as a stream enterer, Kenneth wasn't able to get repeat fruitions, a fact I learned about 17 years later. He gained the ability to get repeat fruitions reliably only after attaining second path. I had taken Kenneth's instruction to heart, and in this way managed at least a fruition a day for the first few days, then more after that. This is clearly of benefit, as it seems better to be able to get repeat fruitions than not, as not only do they teach you profound lessons about reality and confirm that you got what you think you got, but they also are very nice, at least until their afterglow wears off. However, by practicing with what can only reasonably be described as horribly imbalanced effort, I also succeeded in basically totally frying myself. It was all way too much. Now, maybe somebody in the audience has a better idea, and I'm sure I missed it in the text or need to be reminded. But why, when you're getting a repeat fruition, wouldn't the next fruition be second path, and then after that be third path and fourth path? But that's not what he's kind of not measuring it that way. What distinguishes repeat fruition from a path? I'll probably have to go back and watch the video where I go over that, but I'm missing that personally. Okay, Christopher Titmuss had warned me against this in his totally non-map-based way, specifically saying, "All right, let it settle." While I really respected Christopher Titmuss, who I consider an arahant, and his knowledge of insight practices, he wasn't a map guy, and I had a real bias for the maps, as the maps had helped me a lot. So instead of listening to Christopher, I listened to the map side of the available advice, as interpreted by Kenneth, and his possibly reacting to not being able to get fruitions and really wishing he could have had them after stream entry. I powered myself deep into some amazing territory, then trouble visited. The amazing territory went like this. First, I was cycling about once per day and getting at least a fruition a day, and they were staggeringly clear. Each door presented with its own beautiful signature. The impermanence door with its rapid staccato frames of reality vanishing after 3 or 4 quick pulses. The no-self door with the merging collapse of this side into the luminous, intelligent eyes of the image on the other side. And the suffering door with everything suddenly, utterly vanishing after being ripped away from what seemed to be an observer. These were happening even when I stopped formal practice, such as when lying down to nap. I didn't realize these were classic experiences at the time, as I didn't know very much theory then. But they greatly helped me later when I started writing about meditation phenomenology. After a few days, I wanted to see what the jhanas were like. So the jhanas are like concentration meditation, where you're focusing on an object rather than on your 5 sense doors and your mental sensations and investigating them for those 3 characteristics: no self, impermanence, and dissatisfactoriness. During one sit, I resolved to have the jhanas present themselves. And sure enough, one after the other, all 8 jhanas presented easily, nearly effortlessly, each shifting after a few minutes to the next one. They went from bliss to deep rapture, out to a broader, silent, cool bliss. Further, to the neutral, panoramic, perfectly quiet ease of well-done 4th jhana that I would recognize from when I was 3 or 4 years old. That neutrality dissolved into space, with body totally gone in true, silently glorious, full-on, formless style, everything just boundless. That space became luminous, and that vastness felt so present and clear that all vanished to nothingness. That vanishing somehow tuned itself to not anything in particular, not even nothingness. Then the mind came out from that, and then wham, another fruition. So right there, he's really succinctly describing the 8 jhanas of concentration meditation. So the first 4 have form. I guess that's the first paragraph here. And then the next paragraph is the 4 formless jhanas. And so he describes that experience right there in a pretty short span. There's obviously a more detailed map earlier in the book. But wham, another fruition. It would have been an interesting skill to practice and get good at, but I didn't really have much interest. Concentration meditation is what he's talking about. Being a totally vipassana rules over shamatha, snob at the time, like insight over concentration. Influenced by my misinterpretations of Mahasi Sayadaw's tradition as I was. And I wouldn't regain the ability to get into jhanas of that depth and cleanliness until about 9 months down the road. One of the things that stream entry did to me was that I began to perceive the world and those around me very differently. Everything suddenly seemed to me the inevitable movement of empty compassion. All emotions were the natural result of confused, empty phenomena trying to be happy and reduce suffering. however unskillfully. All meditators were similarly just this empty process moving towards inevitable wisdom. The convergence of attention in fruition seemed an inevitability for all beings, like leaves falling off trees. One day, it is just going to happen to all conscious entities. The section earlier in this book that discusses compassion underlying all negative emotions comes from the insights during this period. I should also mention that I was becoming extremely edgy, and as the days went on, I got more so. I hadn't learned yet that I possessed the ability to go much too far into the realm of over-application of effort and energy. The momentum that I had built up was now very hard to ground down, integrate, and embody skillfully. My mind was like a forest fire, and everything just seemed to make it blaze hotter. At points, I was physically shaking, but not really in that arising and passing insight way, just in an ultra jacked up on hyper gonzo practice on the runway to crazy kind of way. I saw myself as being at once staggeringly wise and a complete basket case. My practice was seriously out of balance. For the remainder of the retreat, I worked to stabilize, get grounded, and regroup so that when the retreat ended, I wouldn't make a complete mess of things. I was only moderately successful. And that is the end of that chapter. Now we move on to chapter 52, which is called The Great Stream Enterer. The retreat ended, and for the next few weeks, I, the Great Stream Enterer, managed to alienate almost every individual who had the misfortune to speak with me for any length of time. Worse, within 4 weeks, I began experiencing the difficult physical raptures of the next set of early insight stages. In retrospect, I think that some of those early pre-second path insight stages arose during the 27-day retreat, but I just didn't recognize them, as I didn't have any theoretical or practical background on what review versus progress practice and stage transitions looked like, or how to map that strange post-stream entry territory. So I think that's kind of answering my question, that he's cycling through that in his review stage, which is stage 16, after fruition. So he's making those cycles in the review stage. I think that's what the case is. Again, if you have any better ideas, please let me know. New territory was showing up, probably because I was still practicing hard, 3 or more hours each day, and had made powerful resolutions to proceed further on the path of insight as rapidly as possible, and that new territory was kicking my gung-ho butt. My neck went so stiff in the next third insight stage, that which is the 3 characteristics, which is often accompanied by various bodily pains, that I could barely move my head for 9 days. The pain was excruciating. Again, I had no idea what was happening. Many years later, I have concluded that the best thing to do after attaining a path is to chill out for a while, or practice moderately and with good balanced guidance, though you might need to modify this advice depending on your own assessment of your practice, strengths, and weaknesses. Hadn't I noticed on that retreat that it was easiest to get a fruition when I tried to take a nap after lunch? Why didn't I learn from that? No one had told me that the beginning of a new cycle of insight could arise so quickly, or what it could be like to be trapped in the odd in-between stages by pushing too hard. I was either having a very hard time in 3 characteristics, or had crossed the arising and passing, stage 4, on the way to second path without knowing it, and was dark nighting hard. So dark night is stages 5 through 10. Regardless, I was out of my depth and pushing further beyond my depth. Again, I wish I had had the advantage of knowing someone who wouldn't have been alienated by my edginess and was willing to talk honestly or listen empathetically or empathically about these things. Despite my continued contact with senior meditation teachers, no one was willing to lay out the practical information that I needed desperately and which I present here. I had to figure it out the hard way by basically crashing into people. Was I bitter? You bet I was. Am I still? Yeah, probably, though it's easier to laugh from 20 years distance. At the time, though, it seemed like a very big deal. Was I also very grateful even to have these difficulties to be bitter about? Absolutely. Finally, during some very strange 2 weeks at IMS in Boston, I believe, I can't remember what that stands for, but it's like Integrated Meditation Center, or center doesn't begin with S, but sanctuary maybe. In late February 1996, when I tried to be on staff there, but got kicked out due to having too much rebellious energy, quote. As one person put it, can't blame them really, as I likely would have kicked myself out too had I been them. I had the good fortune to get an interview with Joseph Goldstein. He said very little, but did give me the excellent advice, nail down what you've got. Within a few weeks of relaxing and letting things settle and inclining back to review territory, I settled into mastery. Inclining back to review territory, I settled into mastery of the previous stages and got on with my life. So that's what review is for, is to like master the previous stages. And I think that's where he's cycling here. But then he moved into the next path, and that was too much at that point. We moved back to North Carolina sometime in March 1996. And a few months later, we managed to get together enough money by doing some small construction projects to be able to rent a small apartment. I got a job at the National AIDS Hotline and a part-time job doing data collection for a nurse's PhD research interviewing VA patients about their nursing care. I was practicing at least a few hours each day and pushing hard for second path, as I had managed in the time from February at IMS until that summer to get quite good at the review phase of stream entry, with relatively frequent fruitions occurring easily and naturally, and the cycles giving me little trouble in daily life. At that same time, Kenneth Folk had run into trouble with his relationship with his girlfriend and was now up in Maine. His plans had not worked out there, and as he now needed a place to live and a job, I invited him to stay with us. He came down to live in North Carolina again so he could regroup and recover, and I was looking for help getting second path, which he said he had. So it seemed a fortuitous synchronicity. I should add at this point that my relationship with Kenneth Folk is very complicated, and our stories of exactly how it all went down do not entirely match up on some key points. I have tried to present events and the issues as neutrally and fairly as I can, but please realize that this presentation is a compromise, has powerful political underpinnings, and is highly edited and whitewashed. In the interests of fairness and Dharma brotherhood, I have invited Kenneth to review this section, and this is as close as we can get to a mutually acceptable version of the story. Yet this is clearly my retelling of the story from my point of view. Kenneth gave me some Dharma advice during this time that was a mix of very useful and somewhat unhelpful. By this time, I am referring to the brief period of about 5 weeks from late June through July of 1996. I think of this as a golden period of spirited and open Dharma conversation that would have a substantial impact on my practice. Like all things, it didn't last. Still, having seen that it can occur, however briefly, I have tried to advocate for and promote a culture of open and mutually supportive conversations in the Dharma world today. I've also realized how fragile such things can be, and so I urge you to cultivate those qualities within yourself that are conducive to harmonious and beneficial interactions. Shortly after Kenneth's arrival in early July, I crossed the arising and passing of Second Path on the way home from a training class at the National AIDS Hotline, and during a subsequent sit on my couch, had this cool experience in which I could see the little living room through my closed eyelids that looked almost perfectly identical to the actual living room, except that my copy of the Oxford English Dictionary looked like a portal to another realm. It turns out that seeing through closed eyelids is common enough during the arising and passing, and I have had it happen a few times since then. Shortly after, I got very anxious and irritable, and after a week or so of me trying to force myself up to equanimity, with Kenneth and my wife getting extremely annoyed by my obnoxious behavior and edgy energy at that time, Kenneth gave me the very sound advice to stop practicing for 3 days, and 2 days later, on July 27th, 1996, in the break room of the National AIDS Hotline, everything swirled and vanished. Mix of no self door and suffering door, and I got Second Path. And that is when new troubles began. And that is the end of chapter 52. Chapter 53 is called Dharma Power, Dharma Poison. You see, Kenneth, being 10 years older than me and having gone on longer retreats, had this notion of himself as being above me in some way that, for him, had become a fixed role and identity. My attaining Second Path in daily life, when it had taken him a 6-month retreat in Burma, and us now being at the same rank, if you will, flipped him out. It is hard to explain all the chaos, pain, confusion, complexity, and bullshit that would result for about the next 16 years or so from this, and it nearly destroyed our otherwise very good long friendship. He initially believed me to have attained Second Path and said so, but then some weeks later decided that, after having conferred with Bill Hamilton, that not only did I not have Second Path, but I didn't even have stream entry in the first place. Instead, I was deemed to be some sort of hyper-delusional dark night yogi doing heavy shamatha practices and just deceiving myself and making stuff up. Fortunately, many years later in 2010, he apologized to me for what went down, but in that middle period, wow, what a mess. Our identification with ourselves as practitioners with some degree of realization caused an amazing amount of pain and conflict. Despite Bill now believing what he believed about my practice, he would still answer lots of questions about Dharma theory, fractals, jhanas, paths, and all sorts of esoteric Dharma topics. Though, as already mentioned, I had to drag it out of him. Kenneth and I stopped talking about Dharma entirely, except for the occasional thoroughly unhelpful argument, and that would continue from early September 1996 until around April 2003. That's a damn long time for people who cared about nothing more. Thus, Kenneth knew only the vaguest details of what happened next in my life, and basically knew nothing whatsoever of my practice from 1997 to 2003, a period during which our uneasy truce remained in place since I kept everything to myself. From August 1996 through very early 1997, I spent most of my pocket money, which was quite limited, on long-distance phone calls to Bill. This was in the days before cell phones and before Skype or Google Voice, etc. Bill taught me much that was useful, but he still believed that I was completely delusional and seemed to teach me with great reluctance. It would not be long before that dialogue ended for a few reasons, one of which that Bill returned to Burma for his last retreat. The practical points here are many, and if they can help you avoid even a small number of the mistakes Kenneth and I made, then some good will have come of something very painful. Please avoid claiming certainty of what another has attained or not attained, as it is difficult to know definitively. Just as with therapy, be careful of attempting to diagnose or treat close friends and relatives, as your objectivity and accuracy is likely to be limited. For the same reasons, be extremely careful when trying to teach anyone who is very close to you. If someone doesn't want your help and is not actively hurting and or is not a threat to themselves or anyone else, you can offer help, but avoid trying to force it on them. Avoid Dharma competition beyond that which is healthy, playful, and friendly, and that inspires the best in you to practice well. Dharma competition can rapidly get extremely ugly and cause long-term damage to all involved, and even to those not directly involved. If you are having strong reactions to someone else's practice, consider that this may say more about your psychodynamics and practice, particularly with respect to your ethical training and emotional baggage, than about the other person's practice. These are lessons we learn the hard way. I would recommend the easy way, given a chance. Okay, that's the end of the chapter, and we'll stop there, but the next chapter is called The Middle Pass, PATHS, and we'll take over there starting tomorrow when we come back. Please join me then, and thanks for tuning in today.